right then, this video is going to be completely unscripted. I'm just talking to microphone. I'm not using any bits of paper with prompts on, so hopefully I'll be able to get my point across in this video. And this video is about the dumbing down and merging of Asperger's and autism, where a lot of people seem to just get confused with the two and just merge them together like they're the same thing. And this is something I'm particularly passionate about because this has affected me. And I don't get why, but so many times people, like teachers or people who are managing education places, seem to think Asperger's and autism are the same thing. Or a lot of time people think that Asperger's is a type of autism. This really annoys me. It is something I really want to talk about because this misunderstanding and lack of education has caused me and so many people with Asperger's a lot of problems. Firstly, Asperger's is in the autistic spectrum. Asperger's is not a type of autism. And this important difference is really important. And another thing that people seem to get confused about the most is the difference between high-functioning autism and Asperger's. So let's talk about the differences. High-functioning autism refers to someone with autism who very much thinks like someone with autism, but without the severe autism side of it. So they're still able to have like full intelligence and can cope in society. So they don't have full autism, but it's very much autism rather than Asperger's. Asperger's, on the other hand, does overlap with autism, which is why there's so much confusion, because there's such a big overlap. Yet autism and Asperger's are very, very fundamentally different and need to be treated like they're different, and trying to act like they're the same thing is particularly bad for people who have Asperger's like myself. And it's this lack of understanding. People with Asperger's get put into autism groups which are very much there to help people with autism, and it really doesn't help people with Asperger's at all. Often people just sit around in a circle and be talking about their favourite pizza topping or really simple stuff which is designed to help get autistic people to talk and communicate, which is a good thing, but it's not helpful for people with Asperger's. So, autism, high-functioning autism, Asperger's and dyspraxia. Let's go through the differences between them. All of these have tendencies, and a tendency means a certain characteristic element of someone's behaviour which is part of the autistic spectrum, and then you add up which tendencies that person has. Autism, high-functioning autism, Asperger's or dyspraxia, and technically dyspraxia is not part of the autistic spectrum, but I'm including it for the sake of this video to get an understanding of how it works. Whichever one you have the most tendencies of is what you're diagnosed with. So if you're diagnosed with Asperger's, you cannot have autism. You can only have one. This is where it gets quite confusing, because the tendencies for autism massively overlap with the tendencies for Asperger's, which is why there's a confusion of people thinking that autism and Asperger's is very similar and should be treated the same, when in fact, despite the tendencies overlapping, they are very different. And also, this does mean that if you have Asperger's, you're very likely, almost certainly, going to have some tendencies of autism because of the overlap, and you're very likely to have some tendencies of possibly bipolar, ADHD and dyspraxia. But because you've had the most tendencies for Asperger's, you have Asperger's and you don't have the others, despite having some of the symptoms of the others. And that's kind of how it works. That's how you get diagnosed. So if you have Asperger's, one very big thing of it is the way you think and your outlook on the world. And you very much think differently to a normal person. But even though it's similar to autism, the way you think and the way you need help is fundamentally different to autism. If you have autism, full autism is very much a condition. It disables you. You're able to achieve less with autism because it stops you from fulfilling what you could do if you were normal. So very much, I'm not going to say autism is a bad thing, because that would be grossly dumbing down for me to say it. It's more complicated than simply using terms like good or bad. But autism is very limiting. High-functioning autism means you have the autistic tendencies, but you're not so much limited. So you're able to go out and do things, you're able to cope with society in general and go out and do stuff, but you have the autistic tendencies, like, let's give a couple of examples, like being sort of isolated, not being able to cope with social situations, not being able to communicate very well, having specialist interest, although the way the specialist interest works is something I'm going to come into later, because it is different how people with autism think of their specialist interest to how someone with Asperger's thinks of their specialist interest, but it's those tendencies of autism. High functioning autism, same tendencies, but you're able to cope more. Asperger's, very much different, because Asperger's could never be seen as a limitation. High functioning autism is like autism, which is limiting but is not limiting. Asperger's is never limiting in the first place. And to go even further than that, you could never say having Asperger's is a bad thing to have. Although having Asperger's means you struggle very much with some autistic tendencies which overlap with autism, and this is very much a struggle. But Asperger's, you could never say is something wrong with you. And if anyone ever says Asperger's is something that's wrong with someone, that person does not know what the fuck they're talking about. Because let me just tell everyone this right now to get this very clear. I am very much proud of the fact I have Asperger's and would never want to not have it, because I do not want to be a normal person. So just to make that very clear, that is one of the key differences between Asperger's and autism. So, trying to describe exactly the differences, it gets a bit more complicated, and it comes over exactly how people think. So, people with Asperger's will very much take their learned knowledge, which they've discovered themselves, far more above and more priority over knowledge given to them by other people. So someone with Asperger's, if they're told something by someone, they don't accept it unless they have personally worked out something out for themselves. But to expand on that, it's a bit more complicated now as a simplification. People with Asperger's work stuff out, have a massive amount of memory in their heads, and can think of the stuff they're interested in to a great level of detail, far more so than any normal person possibly could. And it's different to autism, because autism, with the specialist interest, people will be very much obsessed with their interest and be very happy to talk about their interest and not so happy to talk about other things, because that's something with both Asperger's and autism is the specialist interest. But autism is very much just wanting to talk about a specialist interest because that's comforting. With Asperger's, on the other hand, people with Asperger's go into much more detail and are wanting to constantly learn and expand on what they already know. So some with Asperger's, on their specialist interest, will have such high level of knowledge and understanding, or be above say any normal person could possibly think of. For example, how many lifts do you think I've been in? I'd say 5,000, 6,000. Well, I can pretty much remember, apart from a few exceptions of very boring ones, I can pretty much remember every single lift I've been in, and every single lift I've been on top. I've been on top probably 1,000 or about 2,000 lifts now, and I can remember every one of them, every single detail about every one of them. How does this work? It's pretty much like a database that someone with Asperger's has in their head. So how do people with Asperger's learn compared to someone with autism or a normal person? Well, people with Asperger's learn by expanding the database, which I already think of. So let's just say there's something I don't really know very well, and I want to find out something that I don't really understand fully. It might be something like I've been on top of a lift and it works slightly different to a normal lift, but I don't know the exact details why. That is called a discrepancy, because I don't really understand it, so there's a discrepancy in my knowledge. So then I'll be very keen to go out and try and work out that discrepancy by acquiring new knowledge. And let's say I learn a bit of new knowledge which helps to understand a certain discrepancy. I'll then go back over my database in my head of every single lift I've ever surfed that's had that discrepancy. I'll go back over every single one of them and apply the new knowledge I've learned to see if I can work out the discrepancy. And also, by the way, this way of learning does mean there might be mistakes. Like if you acquire a bit of knowledge which isn't quite true, if you're trying to learn how something works but you don't understand it and you try and work it out, you might make a mistake. But over time, with new knowledge that comes in, someone with Asperger's will then correct those mistakes and ultimately get more knowledge and understanding than a normal person's way of learning, when a normal person's way of learning is very much being told stuff and just accepting stuff they're told. Because let's say it's someone with Asperger's and they're told a new thing, and this new thing, so as a normal person giving someone with Asperger's a new fact. Now that fact could be just a general knowledge fact, or it could be because the normal person wants the person with Asperger's to be more normal, which is something I don't really like in some cases, or it could just be any sort of fact. When the person with Asperger's gets told the new fact, they'll think through with all of their existing knowledge and see how the fact works out within their existing knowledge. Then if the fact doesn't quite make sense, so there's some discrepancy with it, they'll ask the person that's given them a new fact for more information on it. That way of thinking doesn't coincide with the way of thinking of the normal person trying to tell the Asperger's person a new fact. And because they don't coincide in a way, a normal person just wants the person to accept what they're saying straight away, when the person with Asperger's will be trying to work out exactly if that fact's right or not. A normal person might get a bit annoyed about that, or they might not be able to answer the Asperger's person's questions very well, and it usually ends up with the person with Asperger's not accepting the facts being told to them by normal people until that person's gone out and learnt it under their own ability rather than just being told it. That's one thing people with Asperger's can struggle in society about because of that, but at the same time, it's because of that way of thinking that pretty much every single new invention has ever been invented. Isambard Kingdom Brunel building his railways. You could think of Einstein. You could think of pretty much every single major inventor or scientist has ever been. They've had Asperger's, and it's because of their Asperger's made them have all these new discoveries. And a lot of people seem to say like, well, we don't know why Asperger's exists. We haven't been able to discover the cause of Asperger's. That's because there isn't a cause of Asperger's. Asperger's is a vital role within society for society to evolve. Evolution in humans requires people to have Asperger's, because without Asperger's, we'd still all be cavemen. So unlike autism, which you could say to some extent is limiting, although Asperger's has its problems, Asperger's is very much a required thing to have in a society for people to develop. But despite this, people with Asperger's are often picked on and bullied. This is because amongst normal people, there's often a bit of a tribal element amongst people, especially with football. You might have people who go down the pub and drink lots of alcohol and talk about football all the time, and that is a very tribal thing, which is like a social group. And because people with Asperger's don't fit in very well with social groups, because one of the autistic tendencies of both Asperger's and autism is not being able to cope very well with social situations and not being able to talk to people very well. And also people with Asperger's are very much interested in their own things above what other people would be talking to them about. This often causes people with Asperger's to not fit in with groups of people and get bullied. But anyway, the main point I'm trying to make with this video is that so many times I've seen, like on the internet or in educational, in all sorts of situations, Asperger's and autism being merged like they're the same thing. And that is fundamentally wrong and does not give people with Asperger's the help they need. So people with Asperger's can achieve so much more than ordinary people in certain elements. And this should be helped and encouraged, and especially with computer programming. People with Asperger's program computers so well. And this really needs to be encouraged, but thinking Asperger's and autism are the same thing stops this from happening. So, to finish off this video, the differences between autism and Asperger's, or more precisely should I say, the differences between high-functioning autism and Asperger's. Well, let's put it this way. Within 60 seconds, actually I'd say within 30 seconds of talking to someone, I could instantly tell if that person's got high-functioning autism or Asperger's, simply because of their different outlook on the world between the two. So people with high-functioning autism kind of need similar, but not quite the same, to the help that someone with autism would need. They need help with the things they struggle with and helping to communicate better and stuff like that. Although a couple of those things could also be said with Asperger's. Asperger's people more really need help with finding out one thing they really specialise on and just going for it and going as far as they can and really perfecting their skill. And also people with Asperger's need more sort of help, but presented to them in sort of like a logical thinking sort of way, and really could do with really good programming, computer programming lessons and help on the stuff they're good with.